My name is Deborah Gallant. You are at an Entrepreneurs Forever webinar called a deep dive. Our deep dives we run monthly because though our main program is a peer group with a professional facilitator and wonderful things happen when you meet monthly with your peers, sometimes there's stuff you need to know more about and no one in the room knows it. So that's why we put together these programs to offer you that next level of education. Because it's just a few of us, I was thinking that maybe we could just do quick introductions before I bring the deck on. I hope that's okay. Patrick and Katie, do you want to say hi? I know that you're staffers, but it's always nice to see who's here.
Sure. I'm sorry I'm not able to turn on my camera right this second, but I'm happy to say hello.
And you are?
Should I go ahead? Oh, go ahead. I'm Katie Uden McMahon. I'm the VP of our program department. And I have had the pleasure of meeting, I think, all of you at some point in your meetings. So thanks for being here.
Patrick?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick. I am a community director here at Entrepreneurs Forever. So I don't think so far anyone here is, oh, Kalpana, you're in one of my peer groups. So I pop into the peer groups, make sure everything's going well. I help recruit new members into the program and just make sure that we're staying afloat.
Great. Leslie, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself and tell us about your business? Of course, you have to unmute. We'd all do it.
Hi everybody. I'm Leslie Koza. I and my wife own Tap Tastings, and we are on Cape Cod, and we bring folks door to door to all the breweries, wineries, and distilleries on the Cape.
It's good. Don't let me drive when I'm tasting all those beers. Thank you.
That's the idea.
Christopher.
I am Chris Rojic. I own a custom picture framing shop in Pittsburgh.
Terrific. And I know you've been to some of our other events, so welcome. Kalpana, I'm not sure if you're someplace that you can talk. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can talk. I just don't want to be on camera right now. But hi, I'm Kalpana. I'm the owner of K's Curries. We make ready-to-cook kits for Indian food. Just add water and cook. We sell in mom and pop stores in New England, and some stores in Midwest, and we have our own store in Boston Public Market, and we sell online too.
Great. Thank you, Kalpana, and welcome, Shannon.
Hey everybody, I'm Shannon Gregg. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we are a Salesforce.com consultancy. I'm focused on heavily regulated B2B industries.
Oh, interesting. Thank you all for joining, and hopefully we'll have some more people come. And as I said, we do record this. I'm going to share screen and get us started, and we'll meet AJ in just a minute so that we'll let her do her whole thing. View slideshow. So officially, welcome to the webinar. This is a deep dive from Entrepreneurs Forever called Valuing Your Small Business. We just started some introductions. We'll do a little bit more in a minute. I always like to pause and tell you about our upcoming programs, because once we get started in the presentation, I never have time to come back. So I do that up front, and then we'll go into the presentation done today by our CEO, AJ Drexler, and then Q&A. So what we do is we record this beginning part, and because we know that you may have questions that you really don't want recorded, we let you ask those at the end, and we shut the recording off. So thank you all for coming. AJ corrected me today. We have changed our mission statement, and I had the old one. Our mission is to empower small business owners to grow thriving businesses that sustain their families and support their communities. And it's one that we all can get behind. And I think, as most of you know, our main program is the facilitated peer groups. I'm Deborah Gallant. I'm the Senior Program Manager at Entrepreneurs Forever. It's my second title. My first title was Manager of Program Innovation, but I facilitate groups as well as create these special programs. AJ, do you want to introduce yourself and also sort of give us your credentials for being the presenter today?
I'd love to do that. So I'm AJ Drexler. I am the CEO at Entrepreneurs Forever, and I have just really the same credentials that you guys have. So I'm presenting today from the point of view of a small business owner. which is what I have always been. And, right up until the time I started working with Entrepreneurs Forever. So, I've gone through a couple of different structures of businesses, from partnerships to, sole proprietorship, and have had to deal with the valuation and the buying and the selling and so forth. So, but I will share with you that, this is not something that I, like many of our small business owners, that I knew intuitively. I was building a business based on something that I loved to do, not based on, having gone and gotten an MBA on how to do all this. I was super fortunate. I participated in a peer group program called Women Presidents Organization, which is a program very similar to ours, but for businesses that have achieved over $1 million in revenue. And through that, I had the opportunity to win a scholarship to go to a program at Harvard called the Owner President's Management Program. So OPM is how that is referred to, and it's an alumni granting program at Harvard that goes over a 3-year period, but it's exclusively for people who are already running businesses. That gave me the opportunity to actually learn all the stuff that I had been sort of doing intuitively up to that point, as many of us do, particularly in early stages. So, ultimately then I was able to apply that to the businesses after I attended OPM. So again, my qualifications aren't really any different than any of yours. Running businesses is the qualification that we need. It's just how we figure this out as we go along.
And obviously, we're going to bring some level of organization and ways to think about this. And AJ is being too modest. She knows a lot more than she's saying. Okay, before I forget, our 2 next upcoming learning opportunities a month from now is using interns in your business. And this is with a member of ours, Amy Mosherberry, who helps people recruit and run internship programs. And the 4 P's of marketing, which is back to some fundamentals of how the marketing process works, is our next Forever Forward. You can find those on our events page. If you're not already a member of our organization, you can attend one of our weekly information sessions, and that link there will bring that to you. And here's the other thing. This presentation does not take the place of professional advice from your own paid advisors. I don't think this is, anything that's hugely surprising to you, but I do need to put this disclaimer in here. This should give you some context. So if you do talk to a business broker or somebody else about buying or going into an employee co-op, you at least have a framework to think about it. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish today. And AJ, why don't you start off the conversation by telling us, why would you even need to value your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many reasons. You see a list of them here. And many of us have been in this situation where, we might have had a partner and then the partner wants to leave, or we want the partner to leave. And then we have to figure out how to, sort of end that partnership. I think on this call, Leslie, are you the only one that's actually in a partnership at this point? Is your business a partnership? Yeah.
Yes.
So I know you have a very close relationship with your partner, so I don't know that that's going to apply to you, but it has applied to me at times. So that whole piece of it. Also, as you get to certain stages of the business and you start to think, what's going to happen to this business when I'm done? Like, is somebody going to take it? Who even could buy it? And what does that look like? Because who can buy is often, dictated by the value of the company and how much, an existing staff member, for instance, could afford in order to buy. Many times we are helping folks who are, and again, one of our goals at Entrepreneurs Forever is to get businesses to grow sufficiently to be able to get loans and grants. But the loans and grant process require, that there's some sense of valuation. And then, obviously there's when you want to grow for other reasons, with investors or partners, or you want to issue equity to, additional or existing staff members, maybe not for them to buy out right now, but for them to have a percentage. So in other words, in 2018, I had 5 staff members who I gave 6% ownership each to. And so that the need to, like, how much is that 6% worth became really, really important. And it will be important over time. Taxes are another thing, which we'll talk about. But really, at the point in time that you're going to do these things, you are going to have, a professional advisor who's going to, sort of walk you through the process. Wait, go back for a second.
Oh, sorry.
That very last thing, intentionally building your value for the future, is really why you want to do this right now, and why you want to do it repeatedly. So that's what we're going to talk about next. When I think about, like, why we're all doing what we're doing, why are we in business? What is the purpose of business? Ultimately, to create value, and we're creating value every day. Every business is, has this goal of creating value every day. We create value for our customers, which is how they become sticky and how they stay with us over time, because we're giving them something, we're providing them something that is of value to them. We're creating value for our staff by building a business that can sustain our staff and sustain their families over time. And ultimately, we're also building value for the owners, and whether the owners are, it's a public company and their shareholders, or whether the owner is, an individual or a partnership. The idea that, and I think it's important for us to focus on, the idea is to grow that value. Like, that's what we're all trying to do. Okay, so
Oops, sorry.
So if we're trying to grow that value,
don't worry, I'll stop
slid
sharing.
over sideways. It was kind of a funny little.
I don't know what happened. You know what? I have a second screen and it's just confusing to me.
That's fine.
I'll bring it back.
So I think that's the biggest reason for us to be, like, knowing this ourselves sufficiently for us to do this ongoing, like, how's my value going? And when I look at my profit and loss statement, what line items on here are the line items that actually are contributing to value? I call those magic numbers. Like, at the end of the day, every month, hopefully every month, or at the end of the year, when we're producing our profit and loss statements, being able to say, what is that value and has it grown, is a really important exercise, so that we know that all this time, energy, and so forth that we're committing is actually growing the value of the organization, not just keeping me busy. Like, we're actually getting results here as we do that. So that's what we're going to, the importance of talking about this today. So having said all of that, I mean, that's an internal exercise that is super important for us all as business owners in terms of growing the value. But at the end of the day, the value of the company is whatever a buyer and a seller are willing to agree on. Let me just share with you this very brief story. I had a partner. We were in partnership for a long time, and gradually she started being interested in sort of looking at the business differently. Are you okay, Deborah? We lost
I'm
it.
great. Actually, I wanted to be able to see you tell the story, and then I'll come back.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't, lose it.
No, I'm good.
So anyway, at that point in time, we decided that, it might be worth considering just us doing two separate things. And so, as I was thinking about what it was that I wanted to do, there was a woman whose company I was actually interested in buying. And so we were at a Women Presidents Organization conference, and I called her up and I said, would you be willing to come to my room and have a bottle of wine and I'll tell you my idea? And she said, well, actually, and I said, my idea for your business. And she was like, oh, really? Yes. So she came, and I ran down to Kinko's and I got Post-it note papers to put on the wall. And I just laid out the vision for her, that I thought I could create more value in her company. And she was very close to retirement. She looked at it all and she said, let's do it. And so then we spent about the next 3 months talking. And the talking was really about, that issue of the value of the business is what she was willing to sell for and what I was willing to buy for. And we talked about a lot of things that were not generally talked about in sort of the valuation, sort of technical conversation, like what's important to you. Like one thing that was important to me at that point was buying out the whole company right at the get-go. I did not want another partner. I had just finished a partnership and I really didn't want to go there. On the other hand, she wanted to see some downstream support or some downstream result that might benefit her children. And so she wanted a little bit of a long tail in terms of how that played out. So we were able to have these conversations to get to that issue of like, what was she willing to sell for and what was I willing to pay for? And we got to it without involving actually any, sort of formalized financial advisors. We got to our own understanding of what we wanted that to be. Then we both went to our financial advisors to put all the right paperwork together and to figure that out. So that issue of, like at the end of the day, what is somebody willing to sell for and what is somebody willing to buy for, is the core of, how these things get done. There's a lot of, and some of them are listed here. There's a lot of different reasons why, in that case, she was willing to, just one sec. She was willing to sell because she was moving towards retirement. We're going direction.
I'm making
I was
jump.
willing.
There you go. Okay.
I was interested in buying because it was a strategic purchase for me because I could leverage the capability that she had to create something in addition to that, to create something bigger. Her business was a piece of the business that I wanted to operate. So I was able to take that core and, sort of triple the size of that by leveraging that piece. So there's lots of different reasons why that happens. And that last one about, an owner wanting to stay involved, but not wanting to run the business. That's part of the whole negotiation. Like how long do you want to stay? And in that situation, she stayed for 2 years. She was terrific in terms of supporting me redoing mission, vision, and values. And, she was extremely patient. I'm not sure I would have been as supportive and patient as she was. She would very often say, this decision is up to you, but, so there was a good collaboration, but it's not always that way, right? Sometimes it's just a straight value decision and it's all about the valuation. This issue is, I think, the other thing that's important. Even though I just described a whole process that had a lot to do with emotion, what was important to her, what was important to me, at the end of the day, I was buying a company. And at the end of the day, there had to be sort of a reasonable understanding of what that company was worth. And it wasn't worth, just her, feelings about her investment, nor was it worth just what I thought it could offer to, this new business concept I was trying to build. So those things, it's really important when you go into that kind of, conversation to be able to say, the underlying value that I'm trying to get here is X. I think based on my understanding of the value, I shouldn't be accepting anything less than, Y. And so you going into any kind of this conversation with having an idea of what the true value is, not the emotional value and not the investment of many years kind of value, is super important. The next slide talks about, there are all these pieces that add up to the value. Some are quantifiable, some are not. But the concept of goodwill, the intangible things, are important, and they're important depending on the kind of structure that you put together for the purchase. Usually, many of those things are not, you're not able to get financing for. But there are companies, there's a lot of companies at this point who are like technology companies who are like not achieving profitability yet, but they have a concept that is so big that people are willing to buy. Or you have a company that has existed for a really long time, and so they've cultivated a lot of brand awareness in a market. So they have a lot of goodwill. And so and people are willing to buy that. That's something that people are willing to purchase. They may not be able to finance it though. So it might then influence how that transaction gets financed. It might get financed, for example, over time, where the profitability is paying that owner for that business. And so some of that is just, being aware that what the value looks like, how tangible that value is, will make a difference in terms of how you structure your agreement over time. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I actually want to add, because I was doing some having a conversation with a business broker nearby, And sometimes folks just get tired of running their business and they shut it down. And the second you shut it down, the value, it's like driving a car off a lot. The value changed, because if you're a restaurant and you go, you know, I'm going to take the summer off, if you don't have that following and the people coming and the staff working there, all of a sudden you have completely changed what the value proposition is. So if you're thinking about selling, even if you're really tired, figure out how to keep the doors open, because I think that really matters a lot.
Yeah, and I think the other place that really matters is in terms of, like, for example, if you have a line of credit and you back off on the business, that next business, the buyer of that business is going to have difficult time maintaining that line of credit. So like and that was one of my rationales for keeping, in that situation, for keeping the previous owner in the seat for 2 years, because from a banking perspective, the banks want to see that sort of continuity in order to maintain the financing. So, and I mean, we were really lucky to be able to do that. Okay, so again, the value of the business is what the owner is willing to sell and the buyer is willing to pay. However, there are ways for you to have your head around, what should that be? What's my baseline? What am I willing to sell for? So you want to talk about this for a minute, Deborah?
Yeah, I sent in the chat, you all have this PDF. All it really is a way for you to take some notes as you go along. So we're going to talk about these 3 methods of valuing, and we're going to look at some numbers, sort of fakey numbers. And then there's a whole bunch of links into page 2 of this that, for instance, what's a common multiple in my industry? Because that's different from business to business. So you should have that to follow along as AJ walks you through these 3 different methods.
So I started out this whole presentation by saying to you, I'm walking you through this from an owner's perspective, not from, you know, a financial advisor's perspective, not from an accountant's perspective. I'm walking you through like why doing this exercise in valuation matters to you as an owner. So, you know, and again, when you finally get to the point of doing a sale, you're going to have professional advisors with you who are going to get, you know, right down to the detail. But let's just walk through these sort of broad strokes. So, you know, depending on the kind of company that you have, you may have tangible, you know, sort of physical assets, and you may have intangible assets, websites, customers, reputation. So both of those things are part of, you know, using this, you know, sort of simple way of looking at all of your assets. So you have physical things. You may be, you know, producing a product that has machinery and warehouse, and you know, you might have those physical assets. Then that value is taken at their sale value, what you could resell them for right now, not what you purchased them for, but what you could resell them for right now. And then you add to that, you know, the intangible assets, website, your customer list, your reputation, how long you've been in the market, what your brand stands for. Sometimes it is also, you know, the work in progress, the work that's, you know, sort of already in production, and the quality of your employees. So there's an example there. This is a really small one. So, you know, you've got $10,000 in, you know, physical assets, and you add $15,000 in for your intangibles, and you come up with a number. So simple if you have a lot of those physical assets. This is the most used number, and it's also the most feared and misunderstood. So we have talked with a lot of owners over time where they just hear the word EBITDA and they just shut down. That's enough. Whatever that is, I don't even know. It's not even the language that I know. So we're going to just break that down for a little bit and sort of simplify what this is. So EBITDA is not scary. I know I was scared of it early in my trajectory. It simply means this: earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And when I think about that, I think about my profit and loss statement. It's all that shit that's at the bottom. After we go through our, you know, revenue and expenses, then there's all those adjustments and so forth that happen at the bottom. Depreciation and amortization, for me, at least in most of my business, were happening by the accountants, and it was something that was just provided to me at the end. Interest and taxes are a little bit more obvious. But it really is just saying, after those little adjustments are made on the bottom of your profit and loss statement, let's go back to whatever that line was before that. So it is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is the most commonly used method. So, and the reason is that it works across a whole bunch of industries. Different industries are going to have a different multiple. So in other words, I've talked to people in the industry that I was in before, and they would talk about, their success in selling their business because they had a 9x multiple. Another business might talk about, their success in selling their business at a 16x multiple. But most businesses are going to be valued somewhere between a 3 and a 6x multiple of EBITDA. So we just, it gives you a point. And again, this whole idea of knowledge is power, and going into any sort of an agreement or a negotiation to be able to say, based on all that I know about my business and based on what I know about different industries, I should be able to get a 4 or 5x multiple. And I've actually been in conversations with folks who were selling to a family member as part of an ownership team, a next generation ownership team. There are rules about if a family member is included, that EBITDA can't be too low. It has to be a market value. It has to be an arm's length transaction. So again, this is giving you a point, just a way to think about that. And you might say when you're in those negotiations, well, I'm not going to sell this company if I'm going to get less than a 4x multiple. Forget it. I'm not going to do it. Those are the kinds of things that you can prepare yourself for by doing this. Go ahead, Deborah. Okay. All right, so let's just walk through this. These are just some very simple, just to help us sort of think this through. If you have a profit and loss statement close by from the end of 2022, you can just pull it out and use it. So let's just say that we've got 2 years. We've got, annual revenue over a 2-year period. You might have 3 product lines, item 1, item 2, item 3. And those different product lines are generating a different amount of revenue each year. There are 2 years here because often the models for these are, an average over a couple of years as opposed to, just based on last year. I had don't go yet. One of the formulas, one of the operating agreement formulas that I had in one of my businesses was that it was a weighted average. So the most recent year mattered more, but it was a 3-year average, but it was weighted. So
AJ, let me just ask you a clarifying question. If there's COVID years in here, do you think it's reasonable to average in pre-COVID years?
So that was an interesting question that we had actually in my last business, especially when there was PPP money that came in. And so basically what we came to was that in a business that received a bunch of PPP, the thing that happened with the PPP money was that it evened out that business to close to what it would have been otherwise. And so, and the bottom line was you can look at it either way. You can say this business is valued in this year at the base value plus the PPP, or you go back to the year before and take that year, don't consider that year. That was the point of PPP. And I've seen people sort of do it both ways, where they just eliminated that year and used the year prior and the year after. And I think, it really depends on, again, that's a negotiation that happens. Okay, so when you think about, what the revenue side of it is, and then you've got the expense side of it, and these are not intended to align necessarily with each other, but just to give you a quick way to think about that. Cost of goods sold, variable expenses, are really important to the equation, and you should be thinking about those differently. Cost of goods sold in my business was, I mentioned earlier, the magic numbers. Cost of goods sold was never could go over 22%. That was my magic number. As long as cost of goods sold never exceeded 22%, my bottom line was going to be okay. I was also managing staff expense, but cost of goods sold really mattered. And then you've got fixed expenses that are more like rent, and all of the other things that you've got going on. So let's just say in these 2 scenarios, we've got total expenses, we've got pre-tax income of 110 and 165. Now, there are a bunch of things that come down here. So taxes is not the only thing, right? There's taxes, there's interest, there's depreciation, there's amortization. We didn't spell that all the way out. But let's go to the next slide. So if your bottom line, net income and loss, is 100,000 or, in year one and 150,000 in year two, the average across that is 125,000. And then to get to your EBITDA, you just add back in the depreciation, the interest, and in this case, there were taxes. So adding those back in gets you sort of back to 125 and 179 for an average of 152 over those 2 years. So when you think about it that way, so year one, year two, a 2-year average. And again, my company was a 3-year average and it was a 3-year weighted average. That's all negotiable as part of the valuation. And actually, I'm gonna, like, in the interest of what we said earlier about how do you make decisions that will improve your value over time, and when do you make those decisions? I had some young staff members who wanted to buy into the company. We had a year with lower revenue than the previous year, the previous several years. And I said to them, now's the time. If you guys want to buy in at a rate, they were all millennials. You want to buy in at a level that actually works for you. We now have in this weighted average, we have a pretty low profitability number. This is the time. And so they were able to do that. And that's what ended up happening. 5 of them bought into that company because we were able to do it at that price that they could afford. So anyway, so you take that 2-year average, 152,000, and then you add, you do the multiple. It's times 4, times 5, times 6, and you can see what that value is. So when you go into your negotiation, you have in your brain, I want at least a 4-time multiple, or this business is absolutely worth a 6-time multiple based on my, peer business that I know just sold. But again, this goes back to the actual value is going to be what somebody is willing to pay you and what you're willing to sell for. You are empowered to know what you should be willing to sell for by doing this exercise. Again, and then you'll have financial advisors to help you when time goes on. Okay, so that was the second model. The third model is this revenue multiple model. And I actually tried to buy a business one time where the owner would only allow this model. Well, right out of the gate, that tells you that there's probably not profitability there, because the reason that they would be advocating for a revenue multiple is because they can't win on the EBITDA side. Because if they could do EBITDA successfully, if they could sell their company with a multiple of EBITDA, they would, because that is much more common and much more likely. So the way that this works, and the other place that I've seen this happen is in businesses where it's a technology business that hasn't yet achieved profitability. You know how we read all those stories about, all those big, companies that like aren't profitable yet, and wonder, how the heck is that valued at $60 million? Like, how does that happen? This is how it happens. They have some expectation of reaching a degree of revenue and profitability that the market is willing to work with them on, but it's risky, right? Like if they may have a lot of sales, they may be, like Uber and have a lot of sales, and they just haven't translated that down into profitability yet. But so in any case, this is a less used model. The way that it works is that, you take with that top line revenue and you're applying a multiple of it, but the multiple is usually a fraction as opposed to, a full number multiple like you would have in EBITDA. So the example here, we go back to that same line on just revenue, 245 or 329, and then it's a multiple that is either a fraction or much lower than what you would have seen. I think we said earlier that 3 to 6 is the average for most business categories. So the high of being 3.5, but more likely if they have to sell on a multiple, it's going to be something lower than that. Does that make sense? Okay. The next slide. Okay. So when we think about those, the various models, and really, I think from a managing the business perspective, thinking about it through the EBITDA lens is really the preferable way to think about it. I guess the question that I'm going to put out to you is, what could you change today or next year, in order to increase the value of your company from an EBITDA perspective? Anybody want to jump in?
Anyone?
I do see some thoughts going through
There's
brains
Leslie.
there.
Leslie's brave.
So I'm sorry, I was bringing up my P&L, etc. So I'm answering this question. How could you change what you're doing to increase value?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, looking at that original list, thinking back to that original list about value, you could, I suppose you could decrease expenses, obviously. You could have more well-trained employees. You could, if you don't have a website, you create a website. You make sure that your ratings on Google are high so that your reputation is valuable. Although, okay, these are all things that, so what would I change?
And you've talked about two different things, right? You've talked about some of the intangible things. And then also some of you know, when you think about expenses, some super tangible things. So yeah,
So
what would you pick?
To me, I would decrease expenses.
Okay, so which kind of expenses would you decrease? Would you work on the cost of goods sold? So in other words, the expenses of the materials that it takes to make your product, or would you focus on your fixed expenses like, you know, rent and staff and so forth?
For us, it would definitely be cost of goods because the other expenses, the fixed expenses, there's really nothing we can do about it. But cost, we could tweak the product and make it less expensive for us to do a specific tour. You could create the same value, but then this end of it, we could shave off a few things that end up costing more money than they really need to.
Right. And so you could do that by finding a competitive product to the, you know, the spice that you need for that one thing, or the, you know, depending on the kind of business that you have. I mean, in your
Right.
business, because yours is primarily a service business,
Right.
what would be a cost of goods sold that you think you could?
Okay, so we have different levels of service, one of which the base level is shuttle service. So you couldn't really cut much there. There's really just gas. But the higher levels, we pay for a package of food and beverage at each location, at each stop. So you could say, all right, instead of buying this or allowing for this amount of food or whatever, we scale that back, and you just have to weigh, okay, well, does that still warrant the price point of what we charge? And yes, I think that we could do that. We could lower the amount of whatever we're providing and still charge the same.
Yeah. So Leslie's given us a really good example of like figuring out cost of goods sold. And I think I told you earlier that, you know, over time, I was able to figure out what the percentage was, and we were able to manage to that month to month. If we had a month where cost of goods sold went up to 29 or 30%, like I would, like, the alarm bells would go off, and you know, the department would have to come together and say, what the heck? And we'd have to like have a conversation about that, because that, if that continued over a long period of time, that would be problematic. So cost of goods sold is definitely an area where, you know, really deeply understanding what that is helps you to be able to say, okay, wait, we could manage this a little bit better. We have contracts. This was another place. We had contracts with people who were pricing on a per project basis, but we were using them for 40 projects. That needed to be a negotiated agreement for a much lower cost for that person. We just hadn't, you know, just took a year until we realized, oh, this particular subcontractor is doing a lot of work for us. So,
Hey, one of the things that I'm reflecting on as I'm learning from this as well, is that if I'm going to have to use my revenue number, whether it's averaged or weighted or whatever, it seems to me like I should get as many gigantic contracts in the door and book as much revenue as I can before it goes to sale. No?
Well, yes and no, and I see Christine shaking
waving
her head there.
ahead.
So I'll do part one, and Christine, you can do part two. So you definitely, so again, what are the levers that you can pull? One lever is to reduce cost of goods sold, right? That's one lever that we've talked about. The other lever, of course, is to increase your top line. And you should, yes, you should increase your top line, but it's how you increase your top line. Because, for example, going into a sale, nobody wants to see that 25% of your that more than 25% of your revenue is coming from one customer. So going out just prior to a sale and making a sale that is equivalent to, 40, 50% of your revenue from the prior year actually provides less stability in that what somebody is willing to pay, because that's an unusual thing. So yes, getting a higher top line will flow down to higher EBITDA theoretically. But Christine, what was vigorously shaking your head about there?
AJ, thanks for doing this. It's wonderful. Love to hear you speak anytime. So just a disclaimer, I'm a CFO and I'm an advisor to people on the sell side and buy side of diligence for companies. So, and AJ knows that very well. So I'm a little bit of a ringer here. So what she said is so accurate. So really the way that you're valued as a company depends on your stage. So if you're very early stage and you have a very promising, like I'm working with a company right now, it's a hugely profitable, hugely promising technology that's patented. And they have 27 verticals they can sell this to, and they are going to be very big someday. But right now, they're starting with one vertical, and they're putting their platform in place. So if someone was to acquire them, they would be on a revenue basis because they don't have EBITDA yet. But there's huge value because they have intellectual property, which is a whole other thing. But when you're a going concern, when you've been in business for a while and you're going to sell, then AJ is exactly right. EBITDA is everything. And so the revenue top line is not the salient metric, it's EBITDA. And when you take on new revenue, it has to be profitable revenue. And AJ is exactly correct too. Revenue concentrations will reduce the value of your company. They will discount that revenue because you could lose one customer and lose enough revenue that you all of a sudden you're not making money anymore.
Yeah, so, and I think, Christine, one of the things we talked about, I think just shortly before you got on, is that, there's two important things about this. One is when you're buying and selling, but the part that I think is really the most important part is how you manage the business, right? And so in the absence of I'm going to sell this business in the next year or the next 2 years, this exercise is intended for you to be able to test those levers, right? Like if I get 3 more, and I'm a big advocate of scenario planning. Mostly I've learned this the hard way, that like just imagining, like taking your profit and loss statement and saying, okay, what if I got 3 more customers of the same, average size of what my customers have been? What if I got 10 more of them, and I only, and the cost of goods sold percentage went down from 26% to 25% to 24%. And I would run those scenarios. And that's how I would set the goals for next year. I would say, okay, in order for us to be a super well-run company that somebody's going to want to buy someday, here are the things that we need to tend to now. We need to make sure that this relationship, and that's what EBITDA is essentially, is the relationship between the top line number and the expense number, like when that's flowing to the bottom. So how do I manage that relationship? In some businesses, it's also like managing your payroll. Like, and in my last business, payroll, that number was 49%. Payroll could never go over because it was very time intensive and outsource intensive. And so we had to manage those 2 numbers super closely because, the bottom line really depended on it. And that's where the value of the company existed. You know, again, it's a going concern to Christine's point. So EBITDA is the thing that matters. So whether you're selling or not selling, doing this exercise is super important. And now I shared with you at the beginning how I didn't know this when, you know, my first business that I started in my bedroom, you know, that business grew to $10 million and I still didn't know how to do this. I eventually went to that owner president management program at Harvard, and it's what they taught on the very first day in the finance section. And so I had all the material. I ran back to my room and I locked myself in and I did the calculations and I came out singing to my suite mates because I did a good deal. I did a good deal kind of by accident. I did a good deal because I listened to what was important to her. She listened to what was important to me. We got to a place where we felt good about this deal. But I would have been in a much better position if I'd have been able to do this exercise to say, if I give a little bit here, that's going to affect my multiple and I'm not going to get what I want out of it. So I think that, you know, that's the lesson learned, is that, you know, it's not that you can't figure out how to negotiate these deals. It's just you're in a much better position if you're managing all the way along for it to be valuable. And then you don't have to wonder, you know, when you get to that point, whether you made a good deal, and neither does the other person in the transaction, because they're going to see all your stuff. Does that make sense to everybody? So finding the levers within your particular business and your particular industry that you can adjust and that you look at every single month, like a 1% difference in some of those huge line items, like for me, those two that I talked about, a 1% difference would roll all the way down. And so that had to be managed. And I think for a lot of us, it takes a couple of years for us to be like, what are those magic numbers? Like, what are mine? If I had to pick up two magic numbers right now, what would those two numbers be? And how am I managing every month to make sure that value is growing over time? Makes sense?
Christine, you wanted to contribute?
Yes, thank you. The other thing that AJ, you did so well, that is very important, and it's salient to this part of the conversation, is that companies that can function without the CEO touching every deal are much more valuable. So when you think about your company, if you want to increase its value, you increase the ability of the company to run without you. So I always say to my clients, okay, if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens to your company? And if you get hit by a bus tomorrow and your company is gone, you don't really have a valuable company. What we say is you have a hobby, not a business. So
yeah. And so I think that there's a couple of those, right, Christine? Like there's a couple of like other sort of key issues here that we can put out there right now. That's one. Like one is, and I'll just share with you, you know, in my last company, I did a gradual leave. I started out, I actually accepted the position here to be a 1 day a week consulting CEO. And that was how that was supposed to go. And, you know, each year I was going to add on another day. As it turned out, Joe Callahan was very sick about 2 months after I started. And so I went to my partners and I said, okay, so this might be a little bit faster than what you guys thought. But we built a system where like for a year, I did half in each organization. And, you know, I call that the 50-50 year. My husband calls that the 80-80 year. But it was a gradual way for the partners in the business I was selling to take over day-to-day responsibility. And eventually, you know, I got to the point where I was consulting CEO for 1 hour a week with that organization. And at that point in time, then we could bring the bank in and say, they've been running this organization without me. I'm color commentary on, you know, on Fridays for an hour, but they are running this organization without me. Those are the things that give like the bank, particularly when you have a line of credit, give the bank confidence that this transition can happen, that it has happened essentially, and it's happened smoothly. So that's a super important, you know, and if for any of you that might be sort of beginning to get close to the end of that time, it was way helpful for me as an entrepreneur who started as a founder and, you know, to have the next thing, because it forced me to pivot my attention Whereas when you are so consumed with it and you don't have something else that's sort of drawing you away. There was another gentleman in Pittsburgh who had a really big successful company, and it was torture for him to actually sell because it was what he did every day. It was his passion. It was his, identity. And he said to me, "You were really lucky because you have this thing that you could move to." I strongly advocate for that. Think about, like, when you're ready to sell, have the next thing sort of.
Yeah, which brings us, let's finish up. There's a few more slides, and Christine, what a valuable asset you are to be here. So thank you.
Can I
we have
add one more, and then we're going to turn it over to you, Deborah, to do it. The only last thing I want to really reinforce too is that debt does matter at this juncture. When you get to that EBITDA number, and it's a 6x multiple, your long-term debt will be deducted from that, usually. Not your short-term debt, but your long-term debt. So I think you just have to think about that. If you have 100,000 out there in an emergency loan that happened through, COVID or whatever, that's just going to come off of that number after that calculation. So just, so that's like the other lever. The other lever is just to make sure that you don't have debt. That's going to adjust that number. Sorry, Deborah, back to you.
That's okay. I just want to make sure we get through everything. Okay. So we've put together a couple of slides just to sort of cap this. And I bet I'm going to get some head shaking from Christine, hopefully affirming this, is that if you haven't kept records of things, it's going to be very difficult to get through the due diligence of selling your business or valuing your business. So that's one thing you could do when we ask, what can you change about how you're running your business? We did a whole webinar on creating standard operating procedures in your business, being able to document everything, the value of your inventory, your investments, your debts, having all your business and personal expenses separated, signed contracts with employees, any loans, 2 to 3 years of income statements. Now, AJ saw this slide and she said, "Oh my gosh, people are going to freak out when they see this because not everybody has this." But
the freak out was about the word excellent. Right? Like, start. Don't wait until you feel like you have these all buttoned up. Like, start, because do your valuation with what you have, and that's how you learn. Oh, it would be way better for me if I could document that I had these contracts, or it would be way better for me if I knew how much the resale value was on something. It's way better, yes. But do it instead of don't do it.
Do something. Good enough, better than perfect. Okay. And, I put this slide in here for some talking points, and this can definitely go into the Q&A part. But when you think about an exit, sometimes it's complicated to think, who would want to buy me? Now, Leslie has she gives tours of breweries and distilleries in Cape Cod. Is it somebody else who does tours? Is it the brewery itself? I mean, you need to think about who could those strategic people be. Again, you'd want to be operating your business towards opening up relationships and talking to those people, because you can't just knock on their door for the first time and go, "Hey, would you like to buy my company?" It's like, if you're already in bed with them, if it's a supplier, if it's a vendor, if it's a retired person in your area who's already an avid customer and maybe sees this as a retirement business, combining yourself with someone else, selling it to an employee, or becoming an employee co-op, like AJ sold some stock to her business to her employees. A venture funder can roll up several different businesses. I actually have one quick story about that. Let me go back here. My Directory Maker was a company I knew in Southern California. This is how it started. Do you know how you all have those school directories with all the names are used to? I have a kid who's much older now, right? So you can make play dates and invite them to birthday parties, and it was a printed thing. They created software that built those, and they sold them to PTAs, and they had thousands of customers. It threw off, I want to say, $250,000. And they were bought by Providence Equity Partners and bundled into it with Sign Up Genius, which some of you might know, because they were all talking to the same mom, parent, PTA kind of thing. And these people had an amazing exit from a micro business that they ran out of a back room in their home. Family Point was an early company I worked with. that got bought by iVillage for their technology. They put them right out of business, hired all their people and used their technology. And early in my career, I worked at Abraham and Straus department store in Brooklyn, which was bought by the Macy's Federated people because the world didn't need two department stores in the same market. So there are lots of these possible exit scenarios, but I also want to give AJ a moment to talk about not every business is sellable, because there is that Harvard Business Report that we didn't include because it was actually really judgmental.
It obviously, from Harvard's perspective, it certainly can be. So I think that one of the things that we know is that businesses don't go out of business based on their value so much as they go out of business based on their cash flow, right? So managing your cash matters. And if you're having difficulty with cash flow, it's probably a pretty good clue that your value is going to be impacted by that. Like there's going to be the reverse is not necessarily true. Like you may have enough revenue and you just need to rely on lines of credit and short-term debt to pull that through. But if you're consistently having those issues, then you want to do this exercise to say, okay, is my cash flow a problem because there's some other problem with the valuation of this company? And is that going to prevent me from doing something? You know, am I just purely not getting enough revenue on the top line for the number of people that I have? You know, like those are the kinds of things to really be thinking through. What are the things that could make my business, you know, this is sort of the reverse of what are the things that I could do to grow, you know, the value of the business? What are the other things that could prevent me from being able to sell this business? And so, you know, it was interesting. There was a period of time where I had private equity people calling a lot about buying one of my companies, but they all had a $15 million threshold for what they were willing to roll up. So, you know, basically we got to the point where we're like, if we want to do that, if we want to be rolled into a private equity agreement, we have to be a $15 million company. And I think at that point we were 9. We had not even hit 10 yet. And so that's a big decision. Do we want to, in the short term, grow that much so that we could then sell in that manner? So like figuring out what those are, you know, become really, and what the possibilities. I told you about, you know, taking the owner of the previous company, giving her a glass of wine and visualizing her company. I mean, you can do all, like you can imagine yourself where my company could fit in with other companies, and you can be proactive in going after them. But you have to be very aware that if you don't have systems and processes, if your business or that business is completely dependent upon the founder, there's going to be a problem with trying to integrate, you know, two businesses like that. If you don't have so no accurate records, maybe is an overstatement, but if there are holes in the records that you need to be keeping, like for example, those very important contracts, you know, these are the things that you have to sort of think through. I can see this vision for how my company could be, you know, rolled in with or partnered with or could buy somebody else. What are the things that I have to do to make sure there's no barriers to me doing that? And that's kind of what this is, like really thinking that through. This is also the emotional thing. I had a conversation with somebody very recently, was like, all of the value was based on their emotion about the business. But the bottom line was their cash flow is probably going to prevent them from being able to sell it. So there's things that they have to do in order to get from here to there. Hopefully you make those decisions before it's too late, you know, before, like, you know, you're far enough down that road that, you know, the cash flow issue can't be corrected, or that, you know, the value starts to decline. Many of you have, well, some of you have probably seen me do this conversation, you know, about sort of the lifespan of your business. You know, you want to be selling your business just before it hits the peak, not after. Or when it's on its way up, to Christine's point, there are some businesses that are on their way up. They haven't achieved profitability yet, but there's all kinds of potential associated with them. You know, when I bought a business that was on the other side coming down, it was a huge advantage to me as the buyer, right? Now, remember, I was buying her as an ingredient to another product. So that worked for me. Like I wanted to buy that business there, but there were some strategic mistakes for her in terms of making relationships with some other buyers prior that helped that happen. So you just got to think about that. Where in the life stage is my business? And don't wait too long if you think you're going to sell. Some people don't want to. And I would say the last thing I would like everybody to think about, because there's an enormous opportunity in our market right now where there are a ton of baby boomer businesses that nobody's buying. There was a class at Harvard. It's not these exact words, but it's something like this: buy a boring business. And so, and it was the first time that they really approached entrepreneurship with the HBS, sort of the regular master's program students, to say, look, if there's a business that is washing windows in Chicago, that's not a business that's going to lose value anytime soon. Those windows are going to still need to be washed. If there's a baby boomer owner of that business, now is the time to be able to say, okay, look, you're trying to get out. You have no staff or family that have lined up to buy that business. There are lots of those kind of businesses. So finding somebody that might be, one generation ahead of you, or that's at the end of where those are the places to be able to, they get a nice something at the end of the day. It might not be what they would have gotten if they would have sold 5 or 10 years ago, but they're getting something for their retirement, and you're getting a really good deal on a business that has profitability.
Well, and I think that some of them are pretty negotiable about taking back financing or taking a revenue stream as they move forward, if the alternative is just shutting the doors. So I want to say a thank you to AJ and to all of you. I want you to stay here, but I'm going to turn the recording off, and then we will have our continued conversation and questions. So hold on while I stop recording.